All right, good morning and welcome to day 2. Last time we were talking about in chapter 10 about the barriers and costs of development. Today we're going to finish up chapter 10 and then we're going to take a break, do your quiz for chapter 11, and then go ahead and start on my favorite chapter, agriculture, which I know you've been waiting for the entire year. So let's go ahead and finish up and talk about how political governments influence development, whether or not some places develop and some places don't. What you're looking at is a picture of the Ninth Ward, which is part of New Orleans. This is after Hurricane Katrina. We know that the Ninth Ward was one of the poorer areas of New Orleans, and poverty is not limited to peripheral countries. It certainly exists in all countries, core, semi-periphery, or peripheral. It's just that peripheral countries tend to have more of it than what we see in the core countries. In the United States, a core country, we certainly have areas of tremendous wealth and we have areas of tremendous poverty. So even within a core country, it's possible to have areas of periphery. The governments in all countries certainly have an effect. They influence whether wealth is developed, how wealth is developed, and even where. They can do this by a number of ways, right? By the tax laws, by the zoning laws, by land ownership rules, environmental regulations. All kinds of different places might have an effect. In the Ninth Ward in New Orleans, it was one of the poorer areas. It was also one of the last areas to be given any kind of assistance with regard to rebuilding after Katrina. The government spent a lot of its time trying to rebuild New Orleans, rebuilding the areas that are money makers, right? The tourist areas down around Bourbon Street, the restaurants and the businesses, because to a certain extent, governments feel like they need to prioritize to get the businesses that generate the income that bring people back to the city probably are their first priority. And so sometimes that means that people are not the priority. And we can certainly, if we had lots of time and we were in class together, we could debate that, right? A lot of the people who live in the Ninth Ward were the people who worked in those industries. So getting their jobs back certainly was a priority, but getting the homes back for those people was a priority as well. So there's a lot of conflicting things that governments can and can't do. Every government policy, whether intentional or unintentional, has some kind of geographic expression, right? We tend to put money in the places that we know will make a good return. In Dallas, right, there's been a lot of talk since I've lived here since the 80s about the development of South Dallas. A lot of government effort has been put into developing one of the poorer areas of Dallas, South Dallas, the Fair Park area. Banks have been reluctant to go down there because they put in businesses, and then because the businesses are not necessarily supported, not just by the people who live there, but possibly by the government as well, then those businesses do not do well, and then they fail and the banks lose money, so they're reluctant to go in there. It's kind of this, a never-ending circle of trying, failing, not trying for a while, and then trying again. But because of the government policies and sometimes too private industry, particularly bank policies, uneven development can result. If we look at Wisconsin, right, Wisconsin, the cheeseheads, right, the dairy state, dairy farming in Wisconsin, and then we compare it to farming in Appalachia, which is in the eastern part of the Appalachian Mountains, is very different, and the government has had a big part in that. The University of Wisconsin has a huge department that deals with dairy farming. They've been very supportive of the dairy farming. They have gotten government money to research, right? They have a partnership with the dairy farmers, much like we talked about with the University of Texas Tech University and cotton farmers out in West Texas. As a result, dairy farming in Wisconsin is very profitable. All right, it's very successful. If you go into the Appalachian states and the farming there, it's going to be a completely different story. There is not that partnership between government, education, and the farmers. And so therefore, a lot of the materials, machines, and technology they use are really far behind what other farmers are using. And therefore, you'll see an uneven development. The dairy farmers in Wisconsin developing well, the Appalachian farmers not doing so well. All right. Let's see if we'll get this thing to move for me. There we go. All right. In both peripheral core countries, governments often will invest in a particular area. All right, particularly in a lot of these semi-peripheral states as well. You'll see a particular city, right, that is given the focus of government's attention. Why do they do that? Well, partly they do that because of the fact that they want to attract foreign investors. Right? Investors are not necessarily wanting to go out to the rural areas. They want to go where the technology is. They want to go where the government is supportive of their investments. They might be able to, build a factory or conduct some kind of business there. When the colonizers of Europe went through both Africa as well as the rest of the areas that they colonized, they oftentimes would establish a capital city, make that capital city to be its headquarters, right? They would invest their money there. They really didn't care about the rest of the country. They were trying to get resources out of the country. And so having one city where they could do all of their business was important to them. This often continues after they become independent, right? Those countries will again try, the newly independent countries will try to keep that one city as kind of their shining star, right? If they feel like if they bring in investment to that city, eventually it will filter out to the rest of the country. Sometimes they keep the same city. Sometimes they'll create a new city. The picture you're looking at is Putrajaya of Malaysia, right? It's a beautiful city. Look at the old in the back, and I'm hoping that you're noticing on the left side an architectural feature that you guys are very familiar with. There's a dome. There's a minaret. So obviously we're looking at a mosque. This is a heavily Muslim country, so it's not uncommon that you would see it reflected in their architecture as well. But in the forefront, you see a beautiful brand new bridge, very architecturally complex, very new, right? A combination of the old and the new. You see cities that are struggling to reflect their older culture, yet at the same time modernize to reflect their desire for a more modern society, a more industrial society. Malaysia is one of the cities in the world or the country in the world that's becoming a bigger player in a globalized economy. Malaysia moved its capital from the one that had been set up by colonizers to a new ultra-modern seat of government to symbolize its rapid economic growth. All right. If we look at this next picture, we are in Gabon. Right? Gabon is an African country. It has quite a bit of oil deposits. The cities there, right, have become a focal point not by the government but by corporations. Right? The oil corporations want to capitalize on Gabon's resources, and so they have set up cities that reflect the oil industry. Right? They are geared toward supporting this industry and the economy, as well as supporting the companies that work there. So the government hopes, as well as corporations, I'm sure, hope that eventually this new economic growth will not just be reflected in those cities, but will be reflected in the country at large. All right, the last area that we're going to talk about is how non-governmental organizations will play a part in this one in particular. We've talked before about islands of development, right? Areas of the country that, or cities within countries that are where the country puts all their money, right? They, much like the capital in Malaysia, right? They put all their money into one area, sometimes because that's all they have, right? They want to develop that one city. But what happens is they develop that city at the expense of everybody else around them. So the infrastructure is not necessarily all that good. Who then helps those people outside those islands of development? One of the things that we're seeing are called non-governmental organizations, or NGOs. NGOs are not run by the state or any kind of government, whether local or national. They often, hang on, there's that stupid thing. Okay, so I can't get that error message to go away, so I'm just pushing it off to the side. Anyway, back to non-governmental organizations. They often operate independently, right? So they're not affiliated with the government. A lot of times they are non-profit organizations. We've talked about Heifer International before. That's a non-profit NGO. Here you see the woman on the right. She's working with migrant workers in West Java to try and, help them improve their agricultural industry, or help them improve the education for their children. Problem with an NGO, they do a lot of good work, right? They spend a lot of money, and some of them are excellent companies, but they unfortunately answer to nobody. They are not responsible to the government. They are only responsible to their board of directors, and sometimes those companies are not entirely ethical. There are thousands of NGOs out there, and again, most of them are doing very fine work, but not all of them are doing such good work. One type of an NGO are what we call microcredit programs. This is in Burundi in Uganda, right? A Central African country. Microcredit programs are super cool. They give small loans, $200, $250, mostly to women in countries where women don't have a lot of access to banks because they can't own property. They don't have any kind of collateral. And then typically these loans are paid back. They are to start small businesses, right? It's a lot less expensive to start a small business in some of the peripheral countries. They are very successful. Women are often paying back loans faster than a lot of their male counterparts to regular banks. They are encouraging development of small businesses, and there's a lot of them out there that you can certainly look to see how to support. But basically, they're helping to alleviate that gender imbalance that we're seeing in a lot of countries where women don't have the same status, right? Bottom line, as we finish up chapter 10 here, is the fact that development is uneven across the board. It's partly because of early colonization. It's partly because of the structures that are in place that don't allow certain countries to get into the game or at least participate on an even playing field. It's also partly because of governmental organizations, whether non-governmental or governmental organizations. It's also because of culture, right? Where certain people in the country don't have the same status. We've looked at women. We can look at the caste system in India as well. So there are a lot of things that prohibit education and development. When people can't develop, the country doesn't necessarily develop as well. Hopefully you've enjoyed chapter 10. All right, what I'm going to have you guys do now is you're going to log out of this. You're going to go to that part on Blackboard and right underneath the video that has the questions for the day. And then you're going to follow the directions for the quiz for the first part of chapter 11. Chapter 11 is a very long chapter. It's broken up into 3 parts, but one of the most important ones that we're going to find. So finish up here, and I'll see you in chapter 11.